Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about the difference between searching and researching. Now in family history, both of these things are important. For some of you who've been doing this for a while, this might be a review. Hopefully there will be some new information or new insight that will help spark your research in a new way. For those of you who are brand new to family history, I imagine most of this information is going to be new and really, really valuable for you as you start into your family history journey to make sure that you're climbing your family tree and not someone else's. So I'm going to first walk you through my process for searching and researching, just in an outline form, and then we'll dive into some of the specifics about ways you can not just search but research to make sure that you're getting the records that you need in order to continue to build your family tree. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and dive in. We're going to start, like I said, with my research process, just so that you have an idea of how I work. This is my workflow. It's not the only way to do it, but I have found that it works for me. So my tree is online at Ancestry, which means I can take full advantage of the hint system. So the hint system, for those of you who aren't aware of it, is a whole group of servers that Ancestry has that are pointing to your tree, and then they also point to the top 10% of our most popular databases. And whenever we can find a record in one of those databases that we think matches the information that you've entered into your tree about an individual, we provide you with a little leaf, and that little leaf then points you to a series of hints. So here are the hints for my great-great-grandfather, and if I skim through this list, the top hint is always going to be other member trees, and then below that we're going to see actual records that have information that might be pertinent to my particular ancestor. Census records, military records, find a grave records, draft cards, photographs, all sorts of really great stuff. Now keep in mind those are just hints. So they are not, you have to review them still and make sure that they pertain to your person. If you have a lot of information about a person already, it's more likely that that hint will be accurate. If you just have a little bit of information about a person, or the further back in time you go, chances of that hint being exactly correct are reduced a little bit because we're working with limited information. So you review it, you decide if it's for your person or not. If you're not sure, just leave that hint there or mark it as a maybe so that it gets put into the undecided tab and you can come back to it later. So I review my hints, I review my suggested records, and then the next step is typically to search directly from my tree. Again, because my tree is online, I can come in here and I can click this search button, and it will allow me to just really quickly search based on the information that I already have in my tree about this individual. Again, the more I know about them, the more likely these top search hits, I was going to say hints, these top search hits are going to be accurate. The less I know, the more likely I am to get some odd things that show up in those search results. But again, I have to make a decision based on what I know about this individual, whether or not this information is accurate. Now, if you scroll down this list, you'll see lots of really good things, some things that pertain to him, some things that don't. Make sure you always view your search results by both record and by category. The reason I view by category is because it helps me come up with things I might not have thought to look in. IRS tax assessment lists. That's a database that in the ranked search results under records might have shown up way down the list after all the censuses and military records and everything else. But here it shows up near the top of the list in this particular category. So I love looking at the category view because it helps me to see things I might not have thought about. Now remember, you're throwing everything you know about this person at the hint engine or at the search engine, and so you might get some things you're not expecting. But that's because there is not a record. I just searched for his name, his birth date and place, his death date and place, his spouse's name, his marriage date and place, his parents' names, his children, his siblings, right? I threw all of that at the search engine when I clicked search from my tree. And there is no single record that exists anywhere that has all of that information in it. And so the search engine just looks at each one of these fields as an individual piece of information, and it'll return anything that matches a number of those fields. So you'll see here I have records from England and Australia and New Zealand, even though he was born and died here in the United States. Well, if I was to dig into those search results a little better, I would probably see that I've got people with the same or a similar name, born and died in about the same time. Maybe the spouse's name is the same. Okay, so when you do a search from your tree, the purpose is to see what bubbles to the top of this record list. That's the first purpose, based on how much information might match. And then the second purpose is just to look at this category list and again, see what kinds of databases it might not have occurred to you to look at. Now, if you're searching in a specific country, whatever that country may be, you can use this collection box over here and narrow your search results so that all you see are search results from that specific country. So I can update this to only United States, cuts my search results in about half, and now you'll see here only US databases listed in each of these individual categories. So you can play around with those search results, and that's how I do it. But I usually don't get more granular than that at that level. The purpose of the search from the tree, like I said, is just to see what bubbles to the top of the list and to familiarize yourself with the different kinds of databases that might have information, databases you hadn't considered before. Now, the next step in my research process, so I do hints, I do search from tree, then I do a global search. Now, global search means I click on the search button and I click search all collections. And that takes me to the search page. And the purpose of this is to just start to play around with or manipulate searches to see what kind of results that you get. For those of you who are new to family history, what you might not understand is that it doesn't really matter how your ancestor spelled his name or misspelled his name or how other people misspelled his name. The records are going to have all different kinds of spellings, so we have to take that into account. Some records are going to have different information regarding dates. They're not going to always be consistent. And so sometimes we have to just play around with different kinds of searches to see what kind of information we get. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that when you're using this global search form, you are searching all 16 billion records on Ancestry. 16 billion records. Ancestry is adding an average of 1 to 2 million new records every day. And so when you do a global search, you're searching all of those records. And that means you're probably going to get a lot of search results. Again, it's a useful step to do a search. But what you're doing is just searching. You're just throwing some information at the search engine, and you can mark it exact or not. It's up to you. You can add additional information or not. It's up to you. But the purpose is just to start to see what kind of results you get. So in this particular search, all I entered was the name of the individual, James Kerr. I marked that exact just to see what kind of results I would get. Now, the filter I'm going to use more often than anything else is going to be this country filter. If I'm looking for somebody in Scotland, or if I'm looking for somebody in Ireland or the United States, I'm going to specify that and make sure that that's the search results that I'm getting. Beyond that, I'm going to be probably pretty loose. I might play around with different spellings of the name. I might let Ancestry, just don't mark it exact and let Ancestry return information to me. I might play around with adding and subtracting information from this global search form. Or I might just want to see, for example, how many men named James Kerr were living during the 1900 census. Okay, and that's a really important research step, because it starts to help me understand what kinds of information I'm dealing with, right? It starts to help me understand how common or uncommon a particular name I'm researching might be. And there are a lot of different ways to do this. Censuses, of course, are the easiest way to get a feel for the amount of information that you're going to be dealing with as you start researching. So you can see here in the 1900 census, I just threw in my last name, nothing else in the search form, and apparently there are 12,803 people in the 1900 census who have that name, okay? Now you'll notice at the top of the list here, none of those people have the last name of Cowan. Well, it's usually because there's been some information augmented onto the record. So in this case, this person's name is Susie Alexandrina, but her mother's name is Amanda Cowan, and so it's been augmented that this woman's maiden name might be Cowan. So it's going to show up on the record itself. The information you're searching is always going to show up on the record, even if it's not obvious directly from the search results page that information's there. But when you hover over it, you'll always find that information is going to be somewhere on that particular record. So this is a kind of a crossover search researcher step that I do a lot. Sometimes I'll do a really specific search from that global search. Sometimes I'll do a really broad search from that global search just to get a feeling for things. And then sometimes I'll drill down to specific census years. And the purpose is not just to find someone. The purpose is to start to understand information about the records and about the surnames that I'm researching, about the locations that I'm searching. Sometimes when I do this global search, I'll actually put in a location. I spend a lot of time doing research in Carroll County, Arkansas. And so I can put in Carroll County, Arkansas, mark that exact, and do a search. I don't even have to have a name on that search form, okay? I don't have to fill in all the boxes or, any of the boxes but one. So here's a search for Carroll County. You can see I have 1 million search results. If I go again back to that 1900 census, that's going to tell me that in 1900 there were 18,921 people who were living in Carroll County, Arkansas, because that's the field I put that search in, was the lived in field. Okay, so again, it's just a way to start to get familiar with how a search engine works, what kinds of information is available at a county level or at a surname level, how common is a surname. Okay, so the global search does serve a purpose, and I do use it as part of my research process. The next step is category searches and database searches, and you can see a lot of times I'll start those directly from that global search, right, where I end up with this category list of databases. Then I can go into a specific category, census and voter lists, birth, marriage, and death. I can use the filters down the left-hand side of the page here. I can go into a particular database and start to see what's available there. Okay, I can even combine information and start to look for surnames in specific locations. And that gives me, again, a feeling for what I'm dealing with. You'll notice in this case, a lot of these marriage records are recorded by initial only. Well, that's good information for me to have to know and start to understand that, well, the records that I'm looking at, if I was to search by a given name, might not return the search results that I'm expecting, because it looks like in this instance, a lot of the marriages in this county were recorded by initial only. So one of the purposes for these kinds of research strategies is to start to become familiar with how the records were recorded, how the records were organized, okay? Now, if we hop back over here, this is my basic research process or search process. I do the hints, I do the search from the tree, I do the global search, I do the category searches and the database searches. Let me give you some really specific research tips now. For those of you who are not familiar, Ancestry has a card catalog. I would highly encourage you to spend some time learning how to use that card catalog. I've done a whole video about it, so I won't spend too much time on it right now, but you're going to find the card catalog under the search menu. It's listed down there near the bottom, and what that is a listing of all 32,000 some odd databases available on Ancestry. In the card catalog, you are not looking for people, you are looking for records. What records exist on Ancestry that you're going to be able to search? When you do that global search or that search from your tree, what records is it searching? And so I can come in here if I'm doing research in New York, for example, and I can quickly type that in and see all of the databases that Ancestry has that contain New York records, and then I can filter it down by specific category. So learn how to use the card catalog. It is a researcher's greatest friend, and if you've spent any time with me at all, you know that it is my favorite resource available on Ancestry. Once you find a database in the card catalog that you are interested in searching, a research step is to actually understand the records. So on every database on Ancestry, we have provided you with source information. That tells you where Ancestry obtained these records. Sometimes we obtain them from private collectors, sometimes libraries, archives, churches, all sorts of different organizations that provide these records to us. State vital records offices, just all kinds of different places. Understanding where the records come from is a step to helping you understand how to better use them. Then below that database description, you're going to see, or below that source information, you're going to see a database description. So again, on every database on Ancestry, you can just click on any database, scroll down past the search box, and you're going to see source information. So in this case, we're looking at the New York passenger lists. The New York passenger list database starts in 1820 and it goes through 1957. That's in the database title. However, this database covers a lot of different record collections from the National Archives. And the reason some of these record collections have been broken up by the National Archives into different categories is based on how immigration services operated in the United States at the time and how they processed people coming into this country. So for example, prior to 1892, people came into Castle Garden. After that, they came in through Ellis Island. Once Ellis Island was closed, there was a different process for immigration. As a matter of fact, some of these passenger lists are for airships, so airplanes coming into JFK. And you can start to see that or understand that as you look at this source information from the National Archives and understand exactly which records from the National Archives Ancestry has digitized and put into this database. Then if you scroll down past that source information, you're going to see a database description. It's going to give you information about the dates that are covered, the different locations. In this case, it explains the details about the dates for Castle Garden, the dates for Ellis Island. It's going to tell you what kind of information is going to be included on a passenger list. And then it's going to give you some tips. Sometimes we have these. They're not on every database, but on the databases that are used often or that might have some tricky things about the records, we've tried to include tips for searching the collection, tips for understanding what it is that you're looking at once you find a record that you need. So always read the database description and the source information before you use a database for the first time really heavily. It's going to help you be more successful. Another research tip that's going to help you be more successful in your searches is to check the browse structure so that you understand how the records are organized. Now, Ancestry has, as I mentioned, 16 billion records online. A large portion of those records have images attached. So passenger lists, census records, draft cards, naturalization paperwork. Sometimes Ancestry can only obtain a copy of the index, and we don't actually get the original images. There are some states here in the United States, for example, or England, where they have provided us with indexes to their birth, marriage, and death records, but they will not provide us with copies of the actual certificates to post online. So I've done a whole video on index-only records. If you do a search on YouTube for index-only records, you'll find that, where I talk in more detail about that. But when you're looking at a new database for the first time or starting to dive into it a little bit more in detail, always look to see if there is a Browse This Collection box over here on the side. If there is, that means that there are images attached to this database. So you're going to not just be searching an index, you're also going to have access to original images. And if you click through this browse structure before you start searching, you're going to understand the records better. So here I have the option of browsing it by date or by role. Now remember, from that source information, all of the records in this collection came from rolls of microfilm that Ancestry obtained from the National Archives of the United States. So I can say, well, I want to look at these by date. Well, then it's going to say, okay, what year are you interested in? Well, my ancestor came over in 1901. Well, do you know what month they came in? Well, oh, look, they came in September. And what I heard was that they came on the 3rd of September. And then it will list the ships that came into port on that particular day. Now, if the ship I'm looking for is not included there, what that tells me is that the family information that I may have about this particular arrival of this particular immigrant ancestor might be wrong. And so maybe I need to check, a few days after or a few days before and see if maybe the ship just came in on a different day. Or maybe I have the month wrong, or maybe I have the year wrong. But this starts to help me understand how these particular records are organized. Now, if I happen to know the name of the ship that my ancestor came over in, I could actually put that right in here. Okay, so we're going to put in the patria, make sure it's marked exact. And if I know that they came sometime in, I thought 1901, but maybe it was 1902 or 1900, I can put an arrival year in there and I can do a search. Now you'll notice I didn't search with any name. And when I am researching, very often I get into this process of what I call iterative searching. And the purpose of iterative searching is to start with a little bit of information and see what happens with the search results. And then add information one search at a time to narrow down my searches. The purpose for doing that is to make sure that I don't jump to the wrong conclusion because I just grabbed the first search result that looks like it matched what I threw at it. Okay? It helps me understand the scope of the records that I'm dealing with. So in this case, on that specific ship, in that 3-year period of time, remember I put in 1901 plus or minus a year, there were 19,322 passengers that came in on that ship in that 3-year period of time. Now you'll notice there are some passengers who have no name listed, and there are some passengers who have no last name listed in the index. Typically, that is because of one or two reasons. Well, it's really just one reason. Whoever was doing the indexing couldn't read the name. Maybe there was an ink blot on the page. Maybe the page was folded over and the name was blocked by the corner of the page. Maybe a part of the page had been ripped off. Maybe the name just wasn't recorded, or it was so terribly illegible in the original handwriting that they couldn't read it. But what they do know has been captured as much as possible. And so sometimes you'll see here a no-name person with a birth year and an age and a gender. And as I pull up this image, you're going to see exactly why. And if I had just searched for a name, I might have missed this record altogether. But as a researcher, as I go to this specific record and start looking at it, I might be able to piece together whether or not this actually is my ancestor or not based on some of the other information on the page, particularly if I haven't been able to find them through all of my previous research process. So I do this iterative searching very often where I put in just a limited amount of information and then I start to narrow it down. Now, some of the other ways I might narrow it down have to do with fields other than the name field. And the reason is because the name on any given record is the single piece of information that is most likely to be spelled wrong, misspelled, mistranscribed, changed, whatever the case may be. And so name is sometimes the very last thing that I will search on. Again, it's this process of iterative searching so that I can start to understand the records. So here I've got an arrival year and a ship name and a race or nationality. I might add a gender. See what that does for me. That drops me down to 12,000 search results. Then I might go for the really big one, which is add a birth year or an approximate birth year based on the information that I have about this particular individual. And now I'm down to 656 search results. And if I was, really dedicated to finding the person I'm looking for, I might go through, I think it's going to be 13 pages of search results here with 50 matches per page to find the person that I'm looking for. Or I might just try a given name or the first part of a given name with a wild card and see what that does for me. And now I'm down to 26 search results and that, right? So I do a lot of iterative searching as part of my research process so that I can start to become more familiar with the records, so that I can account for all the variability on the records themselves and in the indexes, and so that I don't jump to conclusions. One of the mistakes that I see new people make most often, and so I'm warning you about this for those of you who are new, is we do a search, we put in everything we know, we do a search, and a record pops up to the top of the list, and we just assume, because we don't know any better, that that must be our person because everything matches. But you might be surprised to discover that the person you're looking for has a way more common name than you thought, or that there were 3 or 4 individuals with that name living in that time period in that place. And so don't always assume that the first record that pops up is for your person. Make sure that you're doing in genealogy what we call a reasonably exhaustive search. And when you do that, it means you're employing good search techniques and good research techniques. Well, that's all I have available for you today. Hopefully this was useful information for those of you who are new, refresher information, and maybe a new tidbit or two for those of you who have been doing this for a while. Thank you so much for joining me today. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.